Welcome to Smarter Impact. My name is Philip Bateman, and I'm really happy to be here today with Liz Gillies, who's the CEO of the Menzies Foundation, one of Australia's foremost institutes on leadership, as far as I'm aware, and we're going to hear more about that today. Liz, thank you very much for being here with us.
I'm delighted to be here, Philip. I really enjoy conversations like this and appreciate the work you do around supporting better practice.
Yeah, wonderful. My understanding, you've got 20 years of experience in social impact, philanthropy, and leadership. And this is a bit of a run sheet. You probably know all this, but for the people listening at home, you were instrumental in establishing and managing the Centre for Ethical Leadership at the Asia Pacific Centre for Social Impact. You did 6 years with the Melbourne Business School, higher education advisor to former Premier Ted Ballieu, and you got a research fellowship to investigate best practice in philanthropy. And I believe Jodie York may have been one of your colleagues for that.
She's worked on the Better Practice Philanthropy Research Project now with me over 2 reports.
Yeah.
And we've done some fascinating work together.
Yeah, wonderful. You essentially developed the engaged philanthropy model as a result of that. And you said to me that philanthropists particularly give lip service to collaboration and strategy.
I think lip service and just philanthropy is too are probably a little tough. I think more, Philip, that collaboration and new forms of collaboration are really the key to how we think about solving the big social challenges that we face as a nation and in the world. And people understand that collaboration is fundamental to that, but it's inordinately difficult to work outside of the silos and really requires resourcing, focus, endeavour, and evaluation to continue to build those collaborations that have the best opportunity for success. The way that I often think about it is, in my early days, I did a lot of work around pathways to work, and you can have very different conversations with different agents in that space. So if you talk to not-for-profits, they'll talk about wraparound services and the need for more resources and the need for better support, scaffolding to support people into work. If you talk to government, they'll talk about intermediaries and the way the system works and how to improve the system. And if you talk to business, they'll talk about occupational health and safety and risk and labour shortages. They're 3 fundamentally different types of conversations. So what's the thing that would encourage those different groups to come together and work in collaboration to unlock new ways of thinking and working? It's a much more complicated question than just saying put them in a room and have them meet. And so much of my work in philanthropy, and certainly around better practice, is really much more deeply understanding collaboration and trying to live it.
And I'm aware that you just finished, I believe yesterday, the day before, the Journey to Impact with Simon Lewis and the Good Wolf Group.
That program has been an outstanding deep dive into new ways to think about impact investment. I see impact investment as another form of collaborative opportunity, bringing the investment world and aligning capital with social endeavour offers a whole new way of thinking about how we build sustainable frameworks for change and how we move away from the old paradigm of thinking that government provide all the solutions. So where the foundation, the Menzies Foundation, is doing more and more work around really understanding how we can develop an approach to impact investment that supports our leadership endeavours on both sides of the continuum, both in terms of how we think about our corpus, investing it and utilising it for social impact, but also on the grant making side, how our grants can actually facilitate and build the containers within which people can realise or really more deeply understand how impact investment might support social change agendas.
So for your peers out there, what have you found out? How do you do those things?
Well, it's been an absolutely amazing journey. It's interesting. I've been having impact investment conversations probably for 10 years. It was quite an area of focus when I was at the Asia Pacific Social Impact Centre at Melbourne Business School, and yet it's still really pretty embryonic in Australia. There's increasing opportunity for people to engage in it. There's increasing interest, I think, in understanding it and the implications of impact investment, of more deeply thinking about returns in alignment with impact. So there's plenty of opportunity, but in terms of a sort of, there's a slow burn on it rather than a groundswell of change and support. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to really think about how impact investment plays into philanthropic strategies and agendas for social change, and how we can build the networks, contexts, and expertise to be able to bring people with that sort of understanding into our conversations about social impact.
Context is an interesting word. What context are you aware of that surprise you or would surprise people that they might be
for example,
missing?
yeah, absolutely. So, Philip, the Menzies Foundation is interested in supporting science entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship's one of the leading leadership attributes for the fourth industrial age, that entrepreneurial disposition, that openness to adaptation and innovation, to rethinking how we go about working. And one of our key leadership challenges is how we support science entrepreneurs and unlock them to build, or have the opportunity to build, investable enterprises that create better outcomes for the around health, medtech, for example, in terms of our focus, and also in terms of building the enterprises that will sustain Australia's future as we move, into decades to come. So it's a really interesting leadership challenge. Australia has one of the most outstanding health systems in the world. We're way above our average in science, but we're way down on OECD rankings on enterprise development. So the foundation's moved into that space. We started doing some work and launched the Spinning Out report that showed that there are a number of challenges that science entrepreneurs face. One of the most significant ones is the funding cliff between leaving the security of tenure and research grants and moving into building investable enterprises that develop to a stage where capital is interested in contributing to that vision. And so what we've done is we've brokered and anchored a really important collaboration with the MedTech Actuator and Bright Light Impact to develop something called the Synthesis Capital Fund, which is looking at how we build an impact agenda linked to the SDGs to unlock science entrepreneurs by encourage investors to invest in those scientists who can create real change in the world. And the foundation in that sense is going to has been a contributor in terms of anchoring the collaboration, bringing the partners together, funding that work, and will also invest in the vehicle itself. And we're having those conversations now across Australia and in Asia about how this way of working, which is about capacity building, bringing together new forms of collaboration, can facilitate and make a real difference in terms of social impact.
So you're mobilising capital into the valley of death between angel investing and VC in Australia.
And doing it in two ways, Philip. One, in terms of anchoring the collaboration and financially supporting the collaboration to develop the new proposition, and two, using our corpus to facilitate and encourage other investors to join us on that quest. So both sides of how we think as a philanthropic entity, both sides in terms of the power of leveraging investment and the investment part of our responsibility with our grant-making capability.
Because I've been part of the Australian Manufacturing Technology Institute Limited, AMTIL, for years, and going to the annual manufacturing forums and things and hearing about Industry 4.0. And I hear you saying fourth industrial age, and obviously the two are the same.
Well, Australia needs to build the future businesses that are going to sustain us and, in the world. We have the science capability. We have the research infrastructure. We have the health system. We sit in the region. We're very well placed, but it's the in-betweens that are needed, that people need to fund in order to build those opportunities and create those platforms.
Yeah, and she's been at it for a while, though. Shout out to Melanie Perkins, who just became one of the richest women in the country, if not the world, and upset Clive Palmer and such with her wealth and committed to giving away 30% of it. It's a great day.
Which, Philip, is an absolutely outstanding indication of what's possible. Do you know what I mean? And the way I think that all of us should feel in terms of our bigger responsibilities.
Yeah, I've got a big experience with Atlassian as well for 5 years. So, Mike and Scott, who've got their Grok Ventures, who are behind like the 5B solar technology, and just amazing stuff's happening.
Well, as I said, that entrepreneurial disposition is one of the sort of key leadership attributes that the Menzies Foundation is seeing in the work we're doing around leadership that we need to nurture. And the examples of those people very successful, extraordinary visionaries, and also deeply committed to making a difference in the world is a really marvelous example, I think, of what's possible as we go forward.
So can a STEM related, like all the hardcore engineers I know, there's a gap between science-based engineers and the leaders I've seen. And what's your take on whether or not leadership can be taught or is inherent?
Can I say, well, so the Menzies Foundation is really interested in this leadership question. And our whole purpose is really to do three things: to ask people to reflect on leadership, to build their capacity around leadership, and to contribute to the greater good. So, you know, we're and in the work that we do, we work around 6 or 7 leadership challenges in terms of the foundation's work on the ground, and we use those incubators that we build around those challenges to deepen our understanding of leadership and the sorts of attributes that we see, the important anchor of purpose, knowing who you are and what you stand for and what your contribution to the world's going to be. And then things like an entrepreneurial disposition, comfort in complexity, empathy, a global disposition, resilience. These are all things that all of us can develop, Philip, in ourselves. The anchor is purpose. It starts from really thinking about the pillars that underpin who you are, but most importantly, to the example that you mentioned before, Philip, what your contribution to the world is on numbers of dimensions, you know, across all facets of your life. We think that's the trajectory that we'd like to encourage people to pursue, and we think that's the thing that's going to contribute to a flourishing life for Australians and their place in the world.
What's your contribution to the world?
My contribution to the world, Philip, is my absolute deep passion to working at the cutting edge of practice to bring together, to provide opportunities for people to come together with multiple expertises to unlock new ways of thinking and working to solve our problems. So that's, you know, my work over the last 20 years has shown me the great power of different points of view and the catalyzing effect of bringing that together and creating scenarios where people can contribute that expertise but move beyond the silos to reframe and find new solutions. And the work at the Menzies Foundation is all set with that. All of us have a responsibility to step into those places, to ask ourselves who we are, what we can do, and to think about how we make that contribution. And that, I suppose, Philip, is my contribution to the world. It's not easy work sometimes. It's hard to get people to move out of what they know into what's possible. But I think that's what I most try to do to make a difference in the world, Philip.
Yeah. So you've been the CEO of a preeminent leadership organization since January 2018. What makes you a good leader?
Well, to be honest, it's a constantly developing quest. I think what I'm trying to do, the things I'm trying to focus on is the conversation I have with myself about who I am and how I live in the world and what I want to be known for, I suppose, in terms of the values and the principles that underpin how I go into the work. I probably haven't always been the best listener because I'm always too excited about getting into the fray. So I've worked really, really hard at that. And I also think my deep and unabiding respect for for the lived experience of people who find themselves challenged and who want to be part of that solution. So as I said, I think, you know, Philip, you're never a great leader. I think it's always the thing that you must strive and work towards and consciously think about. I think the thing that I would like to encourage others that I think is the most important thing is that question: how can I contribute to the greater good? Wherever I am, wherever I find myself, whatever I'm doing in my life, that question around contributing to the greater good, I think, is the key to unlocking huge amount of opportunity, as I said, for growing Australia's capacity to redefine leadership, to move people away from cynicism about what leadership is and to energise and galvanise us to create the future that we all want.
The future we all want. Can you touch on that for me? What future do you want?
Well, I want a future where I think this notion of a flourishing life is really has become preeminent in the way I think about that. What is a flourishing life? A flourishing life allows everybody, I think, to philosophically think about the sorts of things that they hold true to themselves, but implies a sense of responsibility to yourself, your family, your community, the nation, and the world. And I think this idea of a flourishing life and the greater good is very mobilizing, in the sense that we all rise or we all sink. And the role each of us individually play in that is the key to, I think, designing the future that we want. It's not about polarity around political positions, or it's not around which political party you follow. It's a really deep understanding of how you think about a flourishing life and the role that you want to play in that.
Yeah, it just made me think. I've got the Melbourne School of Philosophy from, I don't know, 10 years ago. The light of reason, going from me, family, society, humanity, and then world in the outer circles. And it's just, yeah, it's really fascinating.
Well, I think one of the things we were talking about this before, Philip, but then one of the things about COVID that's so interesting is that, you know, COVID's in some ways removed geographic boundaries. The way the Menzies Foundation works these days, you know, geography is just not a constraint. Zoom has unleashed us in some ways in terms of connecting, and it's reframed the way that I think about the role of Australia in the region and the world. One of the things that the foundation has gained enormous insight from is connecting through the AVP into the ASEAN conversation about philanthropy, the greater good, and a flourishing life. You know, the world is sitting there waiting for Australia to step into that, and to do that, as I said, purpose is the pillar, purpose is the pivot that allows us to do that, I think.
Yeah, I'm so excited about the sort of second and third generation of Asian family business, where they built massive industrial empires and then to service the world, because we transferred manufacturing into Asia through the 60s and 70s and 80s. And the kids are growing up with a much broader environmental and sort of community focus, and going, well, what can I do with this wealth? And
this is where impact investment's so interesting. Do you know what I mean? Also too, I mean, the younger people have this amazing sense of, I think, the greater good and a flourishing life. That conversation is alive and resonant for those people, and we've got to give them voice and opportunity to shape the world and the future that they want, I think.
Speaking of Liz Gillies and flourishing, can you tell me about wine and fashion?
Oh, yes, I can, Philip. So, Philip, where do I start? So my husband and I have a vineyard and a wine business on the side. That means my experience of entrepreneurship and building businesses is real and alive. I live it every day. Fashion is something out of left field. I have all my family. They think I'm the conservative, non-exciting. I've got 4 brothers and sisters, and they're all involved in fashion and more of that sort of part of life. And my sister said to me a couple of years ago that she had an idea for a fashion styling portal, and would I partner with her? And I did. And Philip, we launched a company called LV and Leo, which were my grandparents. And Nikki, my sister, still runs it. I'm still involved just as really a major supporter. She was pretty unhappy when I left to come and do the work at the Menzies Foundation, but we've since reconciled, and she's doing a great job with it. But once again, all of that, after that business, Philip, to be honest, there is nothing someone can ask me to do that I know I cannot achieve, because starting a business with a blank piece of paper in fashion, which probably isn't my greatest strength, was one of the hardest challenges, but most rewarding challenges of my life. So there you go, Philip. Nobody's asked me that question about wine and fashion before, but there you go.
Hey, well, shout out to Jodie for a bit of the background on that one.
Did she? I love Jodie. That's fantastic.
The initiatives of the Menzies Foundation, I've got here systems engineering for next generation leadership, the leadership hackathons with Swinburne, which is great. That's where I did my master's in entrepreneurship and innovation. So shout out to the AGSE, because great fun. School leadership fellowship program, citizen leadership and community resilience, the Menzies Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship Fund, the MedTech Actuator, Menzies Scholarships, the Philanthropic Impact Pioneers Program. This is a vast collection of things. One, as the CEO, how deeply are you involved with these programs? And 2, what excites you the most? What do you look at and go, that?
Yes. Well, Philip, to be honest, all of it, I have to say. So basically what we do at the Menzies Foundation is we identify leadership challenges. And some of those things that you've mentioned are some of the leadership challenges that we consider some of them, really significant.
Have you got a framework or an algorithm for that? How does one identify a leadership challenge?
Well, the board, when I first arrived, the board suggested that school leadership and science entrepreneurship, and because of the foundation's long connection with the law, and Nini and Steve, and particularly the law, and since then we've broadened that to bring in some thinking about young people, Indigenous women, and this idea of citizen leadership and community resilience. But what we do, Philip, is we find that we identify those challenges and we build incubators around those challenges, where we bring we build the containers in which multiple expertises can support thinking to unlock new ways of working. And then we take what's happening in the incubators and we think about how to scale that into systems. And we work in systems in, excuse me, in three ways. We work in systems, which is what we're doing with our school leadership initiative. We disrupt systems, which is what our science entrepreneurship play is, and we build capacity in systems, which is the work we're doing with the University of Melbourne and CADE, the Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Data Ethics, to help lawyers scaffold the sort of thinking they need to cope with emerging technologies and the implications that's going to have for all of us. And then what we do is we take those, and as you can imagine, we have this phenomenal lens into leadership, Philip, and an amazing network of people thinking and working around leadership in Australia and the world. And we take those and then we think about how do we take that thinking and elevate it into the leadership discourse. And the work we're doing with Genevieve Bell at the Centre for Cybernetics and ANU is around a new experiential leadership development platform that takes that insight around leadership and thinks how we can build out programs to build that capacity in the community. And the work we're doing with Swinburne, which I've got hopefully some very exciting announcements to make quite soon, is this idea of how we build on the outstanding work of the Australian Leadership Index being done in Swinburne, and combine it with the precinct that you talked about, the Innovation Precinct, which is doing such great work around thinking about innovation, to really contribute to the leadership conversation through an initiative hot off the press, not yet announced, called the Australian Leadership Alliance, which is about elevating that leadership conversation and seeking input, contributions from the community to define and think about how to build the leadership models that we want in the future. So we work on the ground, we understand leadership, and then we think about how we elevate that into the discourse. And as I said, our ultimate aspiration is this pivot to purpose. We want to create a movement around new ways of thinking about leadership and about connecting people into that leadership conversation wherever they find themselves, both in terms of their capacity as followers and also as their capacity to step into leadership as and when required.
This is wonderful. And I jumped in when you were telling me all the things you're excited about that the centre's working on. Well,
to be honest, I'm just excited. I am phenomenally fortunate. I have this unbelievably outstanding board who are very experienced in leadership and who have a great ambition for the foundation, and who really bring their intellectual rigor, their network and resources to support the work. So that alignment between our ambition and our capacity to deliver on the ground and the support of the board makes this, it's an exciting place to work, I have to say. And our engagement model around this idea of incubation means that we're constantly immersed in opportunities to work with outstanding people in Australia and the world to really reframe the leadership conversation.
You mentioned scaffolding the legal system, or lawyers for the change that's coming with the Industrial Revolution. Is this essentially, like, I imagine when you can automate and outsource a lot of legal work, that could essentially come and gut the middle level of the legal system in this country as it's outsourced. Do you mean scaffolding for that awareness? Or?
Yeah, that's just one aspect of it. So it's going to change the way lawyers operate. It absolutely fundamentally is going to require lawyers to develop deeper skill sets around
typing.
Computational insights. About what, sorry?
About typing.
Typing well, but more around, you know, for instance, cyber. You need to. Your question about algorithms before was really interesting. You know, you can't practice law in cybersecurity unless you understand how the codes, you know, how the algorithms work that allow those things to happen. So emerging technologies are requiring lawyers to develop skills in things like computational skills, behavioural skills, strategic skills that are slightly different according to the work we're doing with partners the College of Law at ANU, and also the University of Melbourne. And
Mm.
the foundation's support is really about that translation piece. How do the funding that we're giving, working with, for example, CADE and the University of Melbourne, isn't to do more of what they do in the faculty, but to build the translation piece between the deep expertise in the at the University of Melbourne across engineering and computer science and the law, and connecting that to the sector to ask, to co-create the questions that people need to ask to position our legal community to best manage the sorts of supports that the country is going to need as we navigate AI, cybersecurity, and these sorts of things. And that's very much the way the foundation works. How do we identify the system question, the community question, and bring together, as I said. So in the CADE example, we have the most outstanding advisory board, Philip. We have people from we have, Susan Kenny, a federal court judge, Michelle Price, CEO of AusCyber, Chen Lim, one of Kingwood Mallison's most senior lawyers, Peter Collins, an amazing ethicist, just to name a few of that advisory group. And that group are giving their time and their energy to support Melbourne University to design and ask the questions of the future, and then for the University of Melbourne to come and build that capability in the legal sector, which is a very indicative way of how the foundation works, finding outstanding expertise, building the incubation container, and funding the things that need to be resourced in order for those conversations and activities to happen.
Something that's fascinating to me. I've been in IT. I mean, I was using modems back before we had internet. That was, I basically came in just at that point where everybody got the internet proper, 33.6K internet, but still. Yeah. And having watched that transformation and then being across blockchain and things, I recently did MIT's blockchain course, which is really fun, up to speed if people are interested. And there's the digital transformation projects that have been going on across corporate in Australia for the last, really picking up steam in the last 4 to 5 years, I'd say, as the CTO became like a really important, what the hell are we doing? Or the chief of digital transformation, really. But as we're talking about AI and we're talking about algorithms and, well, I'm mentioning blockchain, that's a whole nother level. That's a new way of working on top of a digital transformation project, or really companies that are, global first, to quote an aspect of the Swinburne MEI, which is really creating organizations of the future. And do you think you can genuinely transition a I don't know the term for it, but an organization a legacy organization, for want of a better term, into a digital first company? Or are they grown?
We're really interested in that whole leadership piece and comforting complexity. This whole complexity and stages of development complexity is one of the key leadership attributes that we're seeing. So, the sorts of worlds that you're talking about means you can't be the expert of it in its entirety. You have to be able to harness multiple expertises. You have to be able to feel comfortable in how you navigate not being in control. Do you know what I mean? In leveraging those expertises and melding them together and encouraging them to come in to work together in ways that solve the problems that you need to solve them. So these are the really key leadership things that we are seeing as emerging as the sort of way that people are going to have to live and operate in the new world that's emerging. The thing that holds you, in our increasing experience, the thing that holds you and allows you to build the foundations from which you can be comfortable in complexity, you can be resilient, you can be global, you can be entrepreneurial, is this idea about purpose. And I know I keep repeating it, but know who you are, know what you stand for, work on those things that unlock the sorts of pillars that build your purpose capability, the work we're doing with the Ethics Centre, for example, about the fundamental role of imagination, of influence, of courage, these sorts of attributes. That is the place from which you then build the capability, as I said, to feel more comfortable about moving into the new world order, which magnifies complexity, is at an accelerated pace, requires new ways of considering, for instance, the other and thinking about partnering, collaborating. These are the sorts of things that we're seeing across all of our work in leadership that are defining leadership for the future. And it's the sort of thing that we're focused on, elevating this conversation. And as I said, encouraging people to think about how they build that capability and confidence to move into the world in the way, the world that you're describing.
Is everyone an unrealized leader?
Well, I think we had this fascinating conversation about this, Philip, the other day in the work we're doing in Swinburne around this Australian Leadership Alliance opportunity. And, where we got to, I think, which is really interesting, is that, all of us in our lives take the role of follower or of leader at different times in our lives. What's important is that we really understand what those roles are and what's expected of us and how to optimize our capacity to work in those roles and when to choose or when to be a follower and be a leader, and understand the nexus between those states. If it's all anchored around a contribution to the greater good and a flourishing life, Philip, choosing either of those paths at the right time makes perfect sense, if you know what I mean. So I think all of us, even if we don't think about it, and even as I said, the general view is that people are cynical about leadership. They see it as being, the purvey of sort of partisan politics and of people using leadership for their own personal ends. Well, there's a whole leadership requirement out there that is deeper and more important than that. And that is, as I said, this idea of greater good and a flourishing life, the role each of us, everybody, wherever they are, wherever they find themselves, has a part to play in that discussion and in that journey or that conversation. We're doing some unbelievably fabulous work with AIM around this Emerging Leaders Plan, and the way AIM talk about flipping the script, the way AIM work with Australian Indigenous Mentoring Exchange, work with young people around the world in all sorts of manifestations of exclusion or disadvantage, and the way that they talk about flipping the script and how anybody, wherever they find themselves, has that capacity to think about who and what they want to be in the world is so inspiring, and really, as I said, is an outstanding example to us all, I have to say.
So if somebody wants to lead a flourishing life, step into a flourishing life, be open to the possibility of having a flourishing life because they may be far from seeing it on, a few steps away, how do they go about it?
Well, I think it starts by, as I said, I think it starts from this idea of contribution. I mean, the thing that was extraordinary about Sir Robert Menzies, we're non-partisan, irrespective of the politics, was he just had this outstanding sense of service. And service has become almost a word that people shy away from these days, but service and contribution and pride in our country and what we want it to become is a pretty compelling theme. So what's the modern day, the contemporary version of that? I think that's the place to start. Who am I? Where am I in the world? How do I think about the greater good? What contribution am I making to it? What are the things I might need to develop in myself in order to make a bigger contribution? These are the sorts of journeys. And there's plenty of people around the world who are thinking about this. Vic Stretcher talks about purpose being an engine. Aaron Hurst talks about it being a verb, not a noun. So how are you living? What are you doing? What is your contribution? How can you magnify it? There are questions we can all ask ourselves, Philip, and then think about how we take ourselves on that path.
And does the average person, I consider you and me in exceptional places. We work with great people and life's pretty amazing. Where do people find the time, or do they need to make the time to go and ask themselves these questions?
Well, I think that it is who you are and what you believe. I mean, to be honest, that dictates every part of how you live and what you do in your life. In my view, you're thinking about it already. It just might not be. I just wonder if people phrased it. I'm amazed, Philip, in my life at the number of people who don't seem to have made the connection to this greater good or a flourishing life. And who, with just slight tweaking, if they ask themselves that question, may be encouraged to think about the contributions that we make. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, I know, I think my most important role in my life is the role I play with my children. And I see in them their understanding of the way that they think about the greater good and a flourishing life has been one of the defining things that brings them the greatest satisfaction in their lives. Are they good people? Do they have good principles? Other values? I mean, do you know what I mean? So I can't comment for other people, but I can say in terms of the people I have been influential over, I just know how resonant and important that is. And I think the greater good gives you as much back as you give, if that makes sense. You know, that sense of connectedness, of being part of something bigger than yourself, of moving beyond selflessness and apathy to a sense of responsibility is an opening up that creates so much more than it gives, I suppose. So I think it is in all of us, Philip. I just think it's a matter of thinking and reframing who we are and what we are, and then taking small steps, doing actions that actually live that.
I've been fascinated by essentially the last 2 years that I've been in a box, that it's really created a lot of space for people to basically live with the choices they've made up to that point. And there's been enough space to realize they get to choose. I've seen so many people take different positions on how they want to lead in their own life in the small space they've been given, which is quite remarkable, really, to be like, okay, everybody, you've got this little area. This is your area, and nobody's going to be there to define it for you. How are you going to deal with it? And there's obviously the cyclical nature that goes along with that. But I think it's been such a fascinating exercise for people to grapple with these, who am I in this, and how am I going to take care of myself and lift myself up and steer my ship?
Well, leadership is all about what you do for others. Let's face it, Philip. Do you know what I mean? That whole purpose of leadership is what you do for others. So how you think about that role and what you do, what success means to you, how you live that. I mean, these are all the things, as I said, I think Robert Menzies devoted his life to this idea of service. And I think we need to create a movement around this, a modern day notion of service, a more contemporary idea, as I said, of the greater good for a flourishing life.
Beautiful. And I'm just going to zoom way back out now. I'm going to throw that question from Dr. Jody York at you.
Yes.
If you could magically shift one thing in the mindset of funders to improve the field, what would it be?
I think it would be to ask them to move away from making grants to more deeply understanding the amazing opportunity philanthropy has to build the platforms for real social change to happen. So I think it would be a greater focus on the Menzies. We spent the last couple of years really doing a deep dive into our strategy and understanding the engine that drives what we do and how we do it. And I just think funders talk about innovation and they talk about strategy and they talk about collaboration. None of those things are easy. In philanthropy, no one holds you to account. It's not about how many things you sell. It's not about how many grants you get. I think the one thing I would change is we'd set a higher bar for ourselves around improving our own practice, having greater clarity around our strategy, and really understanding how to build the collaborations that really drive social change.
Yeah, wonderful. I was going to say that made me think of Stephanie Gripney, who I met in Colorado, who just does amazing work with impact giving circles and basically getting philanthropists to sit around a table and be like, look, how can we actually, rather than giving grants, how about we give 1% loans to the local museum or the local library? So we get our money back so we can keep using our money. It's not a grant, we get it back. And these people...
There's so many ways, Philip, philanthropy can build those spaces for innovation to happen. Yeah. And it involves working in a myriad of different ways that's far beyond just, as I said, grant making. Look, there's emerging examples right across Australia about people doing great work in that regard. I think we just have to push that conversation further and harder. And the other thing I think, Philip, is it doesn't matter your size. I sat in an amazing forum yesterday and heard about outstanding work that the really big foundations are doing. The Menzies Foundation is absolutely tiny, but it doesn't preclude you having an aspiration to generate real difference in the world and thinking how you go about doing it. In some ways, our size is our superpower because we have to be agile and adaptive and responsive. So it's a mindset thing. Do you know what I mean? I just think that philanthropy needs to, and all those people who have PAFs and things like that, who really still see them as exercises to give away grants, step into the space, think about your contribution, what you can bring to it, get personal connection to what it is you're going to do, and you'll just be amazed at what a difference you can make in the world.
Yeah, wonderful. And if anybody's listening and isn't aware of any of this, which I'd be very surprised if you are and you're not, jump on Kiva with your friends and your kids and, make microloans through Kiva and just have a go at it. I've been doing that for like 15 years. And it's just amazing to see the what the power of money can do when put in a reciprocal format that allows change, with options to like go, wow, who needs this? It's really incredible. And we talked about before this impact bonds and
Impact investment, yeah.
actually bond creation.
Well, but I mean, impact bonds are just one vehicle in which to think about how to use new forms of blended capital to solve social challenges. What I really like about the whole idea of blended capital and new forms of capital is the sustainability platform. Do you know what I mean? It really, so the work that we're doing with, I'm really hopeful that the work that the foundation's doing with Indigenous women in the Kimberley, which is around building platforms for economic empowerment, financial literacy, entrepreneurship, business development. I'm really hoping that the foundation's going to connect with the global conversation, you know, being supported by Melinda Gates, the Lift sort of platform, which is looking at a number of different vehicles, impact bonds, new funds, a number of different vehicles to support women. And I think, you know, this idea of a global conversation about global capital supporting women and how Australia links into that conversation and how that sort of, you know, sophisticated modelling and development then supports women, Australian women in the Kimberley, is just an amazing opportunity for us to reframe about how we think about that solution. And it's all strength-based, Philip. It's not deficit. It's not we need a grant or a disadvantage, we need a handout. This is all about a strength-based approach to leverage capital, to use it in new ways, to build, you know, extraordinary opportunity for those women to reframe their lives. And the work that we're doing, Philip, they want that opportunity. You know, Kimberley Birds, Natasha Short is doing outstanding work in Kimberley, and the foundation can bring resources to support that work and connect those women into that global conversation through reimagining how new forms of capital and blended capital can support that in the longer term. You know, we've all got to be open to those new ways of thinking and working.
Yeah, completely. It's just amazing. I mean, I came across really blended finance models through IIX in Singapore, and doing their measuring impact for sustainability masterclass, which I'd highly recommend to people. And they're creating blended capital around the SDGs, I think, is another course. But just for the listenership, there's the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing coming up in October 8th and 9th and 10th, or close to, and then SOCAP Global straight after that, because I just find there's so many people doing amazing things. I was at Impact Days Vienna in my lounge room like 5 days ago.
I know, but it's a global conversation. You know, we can tap into it now, as I said, Philip, in ways that even 5 years ago was inconceivable. And there is, I mean, it's a movement that has so much potential, and the alignment between investment and social purpose needs the platform that fosters that collaboration sort of role that philanthropy can play.
If there's one thing you wanted people to know about leadership and their potential, what would you tell them?
All of us have leadership in us. And it's how we manifest that and what we do with it, how we develop it, how we frame it, what context we use it in. The Menzies Foundation is only as good as the people that work with us. Our whole premise is built around deep collaboration. So if you've got an interest in leadership, if you've got an interest in changing leadership discourse, if you've got an interest in creating the leadership that we need for the future in Australia and in the world, please connect with us. Join us. Join the movement. That's really what I'd like to say, Philip.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Smarter Impact. It's a real pleasure to bring you these interviews. And what did you learn out of this one? Can you leave me a comment down below? And don't forget to click like and also share this. It really does make a difference. Though importantly, what did you learn? Leave a comment, because I do read them all personally and I look forward to getting back to you.